She lost her job over bread, milk, and 83 cents. By 9:30 that night, Marlena Ruiz was no longer a cashier at Harbor Fresh Market. By 10, 3 co-workers had texted versions of the same sentence. "I'm so sorry." By midnight, a woman who had never once looked her in the eye while buying boxed wine was telling people online that rules existed for a reason. By morning, 2 former co-workers had stopped saying sorry and started saying careful, as if compassion itself had become contagious, and she was now carrying the kind that could get on your clothes. Nobody asked what kind of person gets fired for keeping an old woman from going hungry. They only asked whether she had permission. Marlena was 36, worked registered 5, and had been standing on the same rubber mat beneath the same cold lights for almost 5 years. Long enough to tell which customers would be kind, which would be careless, and which would make you feel smaller than the total on their receipt. She could hear trouble in the way a customer placed eggs on a belt, in the extra brightness of people about to ask for a refund they did not deserve, and in the silence of someone counting money they already knew would not be enough. She knew the single dads who bought cereal, detergent, and nothing else on Wednesdays. She knew the teenagers who counted coins for noodles and still apologized for taking too long. She knew the men who barked when coupons didn't scan and the women who pretended not to see the bagger because seeing him would require admitting another human being existed. She also knew hunger, not the kind described in charity newsletters. Real hunger, the kind that makes adults drink water before bed to calm their stomachs and tell children they already ate at work. The kind that teaches you to smile while deciding which necessity can be sacrificed without the shame becoming visible. Marlena learned that language at 14, after her father left and her mother started cleaning motel rooms for cash. She still spoke it fluently. That Thursday had been wet and raw since late afternoon. The store smelled of rain, floor cleaner, and bakery bread that would be thrown away before dawn if nobody bought it. Harbor Fresh liked to advertise itself as the kind of place where cashiers smiled naturally and managers cared about the neighborhood. Most of that care ended at the automatic doors. Vi las 8:47. There were only 2 open registers and 1 manager still prowling the lanes, like every barcode carried his moral supervision. That manager was Ron Bellamy, 49. Pressed shirt, polished shoes, and the permanent expression of a man who believed procedure was the same thing as character. He loved 3 things: inventory reports, company policy, and being seen enforcing both no free items, no manual discounts without authorization, no exceptions. He repeated those rules so often they'd become part of the store's background noise. The old woman stepped into Marlene's line with a basket holding only bread and milk. She wore a tan coat, shiny at the elbows, and shoes that had long ago stopped being waterproof. Her white hair had been pinned back carefully, the way some people preserve dignity even when everything else is fraying. "Evening," Marlena said. "Evening, dear," the woman answered. The total came to $4.83. The woman opened a purse so worn the lining had split and began counting coins into her palm. Quarters first, then dimes, then nickels, then the smallest copper pieces. She flattened each coin against the conveyor before moving to the next, as though neatness might somehow stretch their value. She counted twice, then once more, slower. $4 even. She looked at the screen, not embarrassed yet, just recalculating reality. "How much am I short?" 83 cents, Marlena said. The woman looked at the bread, then the milk, then back at the milk. "Take off the bread," she said. Then, after a second, "No, sorry. Take off the milk." "No." Her voice faltered. "My husband can't swallow dry toast." That was the moment something inside Marlene went still. It was not the amount. It was the sentence. The way the woman said husband can't swallow dry toast, as if even that private humiliation had to be translated into a shopping decision. She had seen that exact hesitation before in mothers buying baby formula and in men pretending they had forgotten a wallet when the truth was more expensive. "You can keep both," Marlene said quietly. The woman blinked. "No, I can't." "Tonight you can." Marlena reached beneath the counter, pulled out the coins she kept in a paper cup for broken parking meters, and added them to the transaction. 83 cents, a tiny bridge between shame and supper. The woman's eyes filled so quickly, Marlena had to look down at the receipt. "Thank you," she whispered. "You don't know what this means. Get home before the rain gets worse," Marlena said, sliding the bag toward her. The woman took the bag with both hands and walked toward the doors under the cold blue exit light. Marlena made the mistake of thinking the moment was over. The woman held the bag close to her chest on the way out, not because it was heavy, but because it had become the one thing in the store that had not made her feel small. It wasn't. Ron Bellamy had seen the entire thing on camera. He appeared at her register 4 minutes later and said, in the soft managerial voice, designed to humiliate politely, "Clock out and come with me." The office behind customer service smelled of stale coffee and tuna. Ron closed the door, sat down, opened a disciplinary form, and said, "You gave away store merchandise without authorization." Ron had the habit of speaking to employees as though he were documenting them, even when no paper was present. "I covered the difference with unlogged personal change," he replied, "which means the transaction was falsified." Marlena stared at him. It was 83 cents. It was theft. That word changed the room. It was no longer about policy. It was about placing her beneath the rules so completely that even her motives could be renamed. "No," she said. "It was food. It was inventory leaving this store without proper process. That woman didn't have enough money." Rand folded his hands. "And now you don't have enough judgment to work a register." A month earlier, he had refused to mark down bruised apples for a shelter order because the request had not been submitted through proper channels. He was a man who mistook inflexibility for integrity. If stories like this hit you because you've watched people hide cruelty inside the word policy, leave a like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments. Do you think breaking a rule is wrong? If the rule protects no one but the system itself, Marlena should have stayed quiet. Single mothers with rent due are not supposed to discover sudden integrity in management offices, but exhaustion strips politeness down to bone. "How much food gets thrown away here every night?" she asked. Ron's jaw tightened. "That is irrelevant. How many bags of bread hit the dumpster before midnight? This conversation is over." "No," Marlena said. "This conversation is only uncomfortable because you know exactly what I'm saying." He fired her before 9. Immediate termination for violating inventory controls and engaging in unauthorized transaction manipulation. He pushed the form toward her with a pen. She did not sign it. She walked home in the rain with her name badge in her pocket and the awful clarity of someone who knows exactly how thin her life is stretched. Rent in 8 days, electric bill in 5. Mateo's inhaler refill next week. $64 in checking. 23 in cash, hidden in a coffee tin. She knew exactly how these stories worked. First, a rule became the main character. Then the person hurt by the rule was quietly rewritten as careless enough to deserve it. Mateo was at the kitchen table doing algebra when she came in. He was 13, quiet, and already old enough to read disaster in the way his mother closed the door. "What happened?" "I got fired." "For what?" Marlena took off her coat. "For helping somebody." Mateo frowned. "That sounds fake." "It is fake," she said, "but it's also true." The next morning, while emptying her purse to count what remained, she found something she had not noticed the night before. A folded pharmacy slip caught in the torn lining. It must have fallen from the old woman's purse while she counted coins. The name on it was Edith Mercer. The address was Briar Court Apartments, 5 blocks past the river, where the good part of town stopped. Pretending the rest didn't exist, she could have left it alone. She had enough trouble of her own, but some instincts grow roots too deep to ignore. By 11, she was standing outside Briar Court holding the slip and a grocery bag she absolutely should not have paid for. The building looked like it had once held ordinary lives, and had since been left to negotiate with neglect alone. Peeling trim, buzzers that worked only when they felt like it, hallways that smelled faintly of damp carpet and boiled cabbage. Edith Mercer lived in 3B. When Marlena knocked, she heard no movement at first. Then shuffling, then a man coughing from somewhere deep in the apartment. The old woman opened the door, saw her, and for 1 second looked ashamed before she looked grateful. "Oh," she said softly. You dropped this," Marlene said, holding up the pharmacy slip. Edith glanced at the slip, then at the grocery bag, then back at Marlena. "You didn't need to come all this way." I know, Marlena answered. Edith opened the door wider anyway. The apartment was clean in the way some poor homes are clean because cleanliness is the last thing still fully under control. The furniture was old but cared for. Unpaid envelopes sat in a neat stack on the table. In the bedroom doorway, an old man sat propped in a chair with an oxygen tube under his nose. In the hallway outside 3B, she had passed a woman heating her hands over an open oven, and a little boy sleeping on a blanket by a radiator that hissed but gave no warmth. "My husband, Walter," Edith said. Walter nodded once and looked at the bag. "You're the bread lady." Walter's voice still had the dry wit of a man who had not entirely surrendered himself to illness, which somehow made the room feel sadder instead of lighter. "Oberweek tea." The truth came out slowly. Walter had congestive heart failure and swallowing problems after a stroke. Edith rationed his medication some weeks to make groceries reach Friday. The slip Marlena found was for a refill she could not afford until Monday. Edith confessed she had once been a school secretary, the kind who kept cough drops in the top drawer and knew which children were pretending to be sick because home was worse than class. The building had been sold the year before. Since then, rent had gone up twice. New management added heating surcharges, maintenance assessments, and vague building fees that never seemed to result in actual maintenance. Marlena noticed then that the kitchen radiator was cold. "Does the heat work?" Edith answered too quickly. "Sometimes," which meant it mostly didn't. By the time Marlena left, she knew 3 things. Edith had not been short on bread and milk because she was careless. She had been short because the choice had come down to groceries or Walter's refill. Briarcourt was full of people like them, and the story was no longer about 83 cents. On Sunday morning, Marlena went back with Matteo and 2 reusable bags. In the apartment, a widower heated canned beans over a hot plate because his stove had been awaiting inspection for 6 weeks. In 4C, a woman with arthritic hands showed them another fee notice she did not understand but knew she could not pay. Matteo stopped asking whether they could help more people and started asking how many there were. That was worse somehow. Numbers made suffering harder to romanticize. That night, Marlene did something angrier than crying. She started calling people. A friend from church who ran the pantry, a tenant rights organizer named Priya Shah, a county reporter who still remembered her son's name. She did not make speeches. She offered facts, addresses, fee notices. Broken heat, medication, choices. An old woman fired into hunger and a cashier fired for noticing. By Tuesday, Priya had tenant affidavits, photographs of mold, and a city housing inspector willing to walk the building. Wednesday. The county paper had a reporter outside Briarcourt and a photographer taking pictures of bundled tenants sitting beside dead radiators. Priya had seen every version of housing greed there was, but even she went quiet when she read the newest heating surcharge next to photos of frost forming inside bedroom windows. By Thursday, a second story connected dots the town had not expected. Harbor Fresh Market, whose weekly ad still promised feeding our community, had just sponsored a charity breakfast hosted by the same local investment group that owned Briarcourt. The article ran with a picture of Edith in her kitchen coat, one hand on Walter's shoulder, and a subheading about seniors choosing between medicine and food in a building marketed as renovated community living. That was when people got loud. Not because old people were cold, because hypocrisy had finally made the cold visible. Ron Bellamy called Marlena that Thursday afternoon. Gone was the office certainty. In its place was strained professionalism. "There may have been some misunderstanding regarding the circumstances of your termination." Marlena laughed once. "A misunderstanding? We're prepared to discuss reinstatement." "What changed, Ron?" He knew better than to lie. "Circumstances developed." "No," she said. "Pressure developed." She listened to his offer, then declined before he could finish dressing cowardice as correction. She had already spent 1 week learning what it cost to be corrected only when power became embarrassed. The city cited Briarcourt within the week. Emergency heating repairs. Temporary rent freeze pending review. Formal investigation into fee structures. Local churches and mutual aid groups filled the lobby with food, blankets, and prescription support cards until tenants began joking that disaster had finally made them fashionable. Edith kept refusing attention right up until people brought it anyway. Walter, who had spent months speaking in a tired near whisper, told Marlena one evening. Funny thing about humiliation, the minute someone names it, it gets less lonely. Months later, Daniel Mercer came looking for her. Marlene did not know the name at first. Just a tall man in a navy coat stepping into the church pantry while she sorted produce crates. Edith's son, as it turned out, regional compliance director for a medical supply company. Divorced. Controlled manner. Eyes that looked like they had not forgiven themselves for a very long time. He had not known the full truth, because Edith had hidden it from him, not wanting her grown son to see how close things had come to failing completely. Shame, Marlena thought, was the one bill that always got paid in private. He thanked her too formally, which told her immediately that guilt had been involved before gratitude ever arrived. I should have seen it, he said. Yes, Marlene answered. To his credit, he nodded. Then he asked if there was anything he could do. Marlena looked around the pantry at volunteers carrying boxers, at handwritten lists of medications, at teenagers sorting canned soup by expiration date. Yes, she said. Don't fix this like a son. Fix it like a man who has money, lawyers, and the ability to embarrass the right people. He actually smiled at that. Good, she thought. Now maybe he'll be useful. He did not ask for gratitude, only for a list of names, dates, invoices, and every letter the management company had sent. That was when Marlene understood he planned to hurt them the respectable way. On paper, in hearings, under bright legal lights. Months later, Harbor Fresh's district office offered Marlene a higher position at another location. She turned it down. With Priya's help and church backing, she took a paid role, coordinating a neighborhood essentials pantry out of an empty storefront donated on a 6-month lease. The storefront was small. The freezer hummed too loudly. The shelves didn't match, but nobody in that place ever had to choose between bread and dignity. The new storefront had one big front window, chipped blue paint, and a smell of dust that gave way to coffee by the second week. Mateo spent Saturdays there, stacking cans and pretending he wasn't proud when people thanked his mother. On the first day they opened, Edith came in carrying a casserole dish and wearing the same tanned coat, newly mended at one elbow. She looked up at the hand-painted sign above the counter and laughed through tears. The sign read, "Bread first." Marlene smiled, seemed honest. Edith still counted out a few coins first whenever she came through the door, half joke and half ritual, as if she wanted both of them to remember what mercy had cost and why it should never have cost that much. Priya once told a local radio host that what happened to Marlene mattered, because systems reveal themselves most honestly in the moments they punish kindness. Marlena never forgot that sentence, and if anyone had asked her later what hurt most, she would not have said losing the job. She would have said this: that when a poor old woman stood at a register unable to pay for bread and milk, the first question the system asked was not, "What does she need?" but "Who gave you permission to care?" If this story stayed with you, leave a like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments, what matters more to you, protecting the rule or refusing to let someone go hungry right in front of you?